I feel like dark fantasy,
Kind of sucks for you.
there's no hot teachers. So actually it's my least favorite genre.
Hello, and welcome back to Gateway to Anime. How are you all? What's going on? Charlie, what's happening?
I am back. I don't have my mug.
Thanks, Graham.
Because Graham's not here, I thought I'd, spiritually represent him by Jane Eyre.
By Jane Eyre.
Yeah.
Charlotte Bronte.
Today I'll be talking about Jane Eyre. It's a really good,
Always good.
It's a good shoujo.
Classic shoujo piece of literature.
But, I mean, we could get into that. We could do an analysis.
That is actually not a terrible idea. I just said anime as well in that opening there. So
yeah, it was weird.
I don't know what happened there, but just roll with it.
Everything's wrong today.
Just roll with it, man. Anyway, what isn't wrong is our wonderful guest here, Gerald Lillywhite. Welcome back, my friend.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm good, mugless, which is...
Not even a mug at all.
Yeah, I know. What was I doing? I'm off to a terrible start. But yeah, very, very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Always good to have you in. And you're probably, Graham's like become a co-host now, so you're probably our most recurring guest.
I'd say definitely.
In fact, you are.
Yeah, wow.
You are. Third time.
Well,
Third time? Yes.
Yeah, third or fourth.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
we're very
awesome.
excited to be here. I love talking about obscure anime, and I feel like we've just taken our pub yarns to the internet and deal with the internet because
We're here to
we
stay.
are. Here we are. Well, today we are talking about dark fantasy anime. So this is quite an interesting topic, and the three that we've chosen, two of which are what I consider to be absolutely top tier, one in particular. However, the other one is
Also top tier.
in a different way.
Yeah.
In a
if
different
the tier
way.
was inverted.
Exactly,
Sometimes
yes.
you climb so far down that you end up the top.
Yeah.
We'll let Charlotte get to that one later. But I guess I'll just kick it off because
So weird that I got the bad one. It's so bizarre that Sam assigned me this shit show.
you wanted to have a go at this since day one. You've already done it a little bit on this podcast already.
Look, no spoilers, guys. Let's
Yeah, you got to be
Yeah.
careful, Sam. I feel like Charlie's this close to unionizing. It's just going to be...
I'll be ruined.
I'm sick of the harms. I'm sick of it.
Okay, well, so dark fantasy. I guess obviously it's not that nebulous a topic, but of course, Game of Thrones has brought this very much into popular consciousness. You could argue Lord of the Rings. It's not that dark, but you'd probably call it a dark fantasy, wouldn't you?
Would you?
Maybe being generous. It's probably just a straight fantasy, but it's got dark realm. Peter Jackson's version's pretty dark.
Yeah.
Really.
It's interesting. Anything that was inspired by watching your friends die in the mud during World War I has a little bit of darkness,
This is true.
baked into it. But I think,
Raise a good point with that one.
I think Lord of the Rings is just so much the blanket example that everything else is projected onto, and that degree of high fantasy is kind of the baseline that something like dark fantasy is kind of reacting away from.
Yes. Yeah. Lord of the Rings is the quintessential fantasy. Really, it is. Let's be real. And of course, Game of Thrones is now the modern one, and that of course took everything super dark. And everything's kind of been trying to do that since. Anime does dark fantasy quite well across the board. There's a lot of them. Most dark fantasies tend to be isekai or just fantasy in general. They're mostly isekais. So I want to try to steer clear of them because they're a whole different beast. And we've already done an episode on isekai, and we talked about several of these sort of fantasy type shows. Overlord, of course, being a trash dark fantasy. Sword Art Online isn't necessarily that dark, but it's in there, in that realm. But I want to
Made
steer
my
clear of
heart
this.
go dark when it got bad.
The disappointment.
Yeah.
The disappointment was so real. So real.
ReZero is a good one.
ReZero is a fantastic one, and that is one of the better ones, obviously, but we have talked about that. But a classic dark fantasy. In fact, on the last episode, I talked about another great dark fantasy in Fate Zero, another one which is really good in that department. Also kind of elements of, not isekai, reverse isekai, I guess, pulling in the heroic spirits from different timelines into our modern timeline. But we're not here to talk about that. Let me kick off with a show called Claymore. Now, Claymore is a Japanese dark fantasy manga series written and illustrated by Norihiro Yogi. It ran from 2001 to 2014 across 27 Tankoban volumes. Then a 26-episode anime series produced by Madhouse was broadcast on Nippon Television from April to September 2007. So the series is set in a fictional medieval island where mankind are plagued by Yoma, humanoid shapeshifters that feed on human flesh and innards. A mysterious group known as the Organization create human Yoma hybrids to fight against these Yoma. These are exclusively female warriors, and they are referred to as Claymores due to the giant Claymore swords that they wield. They are also known as silver-eyed witches due to their silver eyes and hair. They're kind of a silver vision. Their armor too, silver. They're very silver. It makes sense. Yoma and Claymores are alike in that they are powered by a demonic energy called Yoki, which allows for shapeshifting and extreme strength. So when Claymores use too much Yoki, they run the risk of awakening, where they turn into a kind of super Yoma creature called an awakened being. So the act of awakening is actually likened to kind of a feeling of sexual climax. So while in the past, so when it's like, because the power is so like intoxicating. Right. And so as a result, the reason only women are used is because they tried to do it with men back in the past. And like most things men do, we fuck it up. Because as soon as they got close to that kind of feeling, they would just awaken. So there's tons of awakened beings out there, all the old Claymores who were men.
Sure.
So like that's kind of an interesting little bit in there. So that's why women are now exclusively used. So the island is divided into 47 different districts with one warrior assigned to each. Claymores number 1 through 47 are ranked according to their baseline Yoki potential, strength, agility, intelligence, sensing, and leadership, basically how strong they are. And a warrior's rank rises and falls due to the warrior's strength in relation to the other warriors at the time. It's unclear whether the warrior's strength comes from training and experience, or if it's an inherent ability or affinity just from the person themselves. So the story follows number 47, right down at the bottom, Claire, who rescues a young boy named Raki from a Yoma. Raki's family has been slaughtered by Yoma, and he has nowhere else to go, so he decides to follow Claire on her Yoma-slaying journey. Much to Claire's chagrin, of course. She's very cold and distant, doesn't want anything to do with him, but of course, he sort of wears her down and ends up following her. So her and Raki share a similar past as well, so she does have a bit of empathy, as much as a Claymore can have, for him.
Sure.
So she eventually acquiesces and he tags along, and it becomes obvious that there's something a little bit different about Claire. So she's a little bit different to the other Claymores.
She's not like other girls.
Not like other girls. But her number 47 rank is slightly misleading. And I won't spoil what the whole deal is with Claire. But that's basically Claymore. So obviously it's very much a medieval Gothic European inspired aesthetic. All the big stone kind of cathedrals and, classic kind of old RPG medieval towns. And of course the Claymores are historically a giant Scottish sword, which were wielded by Scottish warriors and women as well.
This is potentially an interesting thing because one of the unifying, aesthetic motifs across all of this seems to be a kind of Japanese fascination with this European aesthetic. And you see it through like a lot of anime. A
lot of isekai.
What do we think's going on with that?
It's a good question. I mean, because almost every isekai is basically straight into a European medieval setting. And all three of these shows that we're talking about are also Attack on Titan springs to mind. Big time. There's a lot. Yeah. It's all through it, isn't it? Yeah, it's an interesting point. I wonder where it does come from. I suppose it's literature, I guess.
I guess like fantasy to me conjures that in my head. Yeah. I'm kind of just like, I find it hard to define fantasy in my head because obviously a lot of anime has, most plot lines of anime have fantastical elements to it. So what do we consider like a typical fantasy would be that kind of medieval, like that kind of video game thing. So
absolutely.
I think actually like all modern fantasy has that inclination, whether it's Japanese or, Eastern European or Australian, this kind of automatic drift back to that European Tolkien-esque thing. Yeah. Some of the modern kind of criticisms of like the new wave of fantasy is all about kind of mixing that up. So it makes sense that Japan would be part of that.
Because usually Japan, like to do their own thing. And, they very, very, very much have their own aesthetic.
Totally.
In their art style and, not just anime art, manga art, but also their modern art and more ancient art. It's very, very specific to Japan. A lot to do about space and utilization of space and delicate simplicity. Ikebana, all the work they do with a Japanese garden, it's all the meticulous lines and space. Yeah. And so it's interesting that they kind of always go to this European aesthetic. Yeah. And I mean, it works, looks great. It's dark, it's Gothic, like these are exactly what leads you into a kind of oppressive, dark kind of vibe. But you know what I mean? Like straight away you go, if you're in there, you're like, as soon as you see that aesthetic, you're like, okay, cool.
There's no rules here. You could be murdered at any time.
It's kill or be killed.
But I do recall that Murakami, like early in his career, like a lot of his films are set in that European aesthetic, house moving castle.
Yes.
But he speaks about as his career went on, wanting to revisit more traditional Japanese settings. And so all his recent films are kind of exploring that really interesting Japanese historical context in that way.
Miyazaki is an interesting, he does blend things quite well. Because even like Princess Mononoke, which is of course so ingrained in Japanese history, and the relation to the land and the forest is very kind of Japanese, but also get that fantastical fairy like kind of European style as well. But there's elements of that industrialism in the town, which is kind of a mixture of it's very much a Japanese town, but using that kind of European industrial setting as well. Yeah. Kind of a mixture. It's quite interesting.
House Moving Castle is almost entirely aesthetically like medieval.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. That's very much.
And that's also based on a book by Diana Wynne Jones, who is an English or a Welsh writer. Did like Chrestomanci series and that. So the book I've actually read the book. I've read the source material of House Moving Castle.
There you go.
Here we go. It's actually really different because, and I feel like they're both, I love the books, love the movie probably more. And I think it's like got a Miyazaki stamp all over it. Like they took it, they made it a Ghibli film and it was amazing, but still kept that. I think that was probably arguably more a throwback to the source material than anything else, like the design of it. So, don't know.
Yeah.
Because Spirited Away is obviously very much a Japanese.
Very much Japanese aesthetic, yes.
And is the best one, let's be real.
It's awesome. It's awesome. We know this. There's so many which are good. I mean, of course, Porco Rosso, World War I European setting as well. Obviously not ancient fantasy style, not gothic horror, but
just celebration of that Mediterranean whole thing. And flying pigs, which are also great.
Always good.
Yeah. It's an old saying for a reason. We've always wanted it.
Yeah, I've often been on an island in Italy and looked up at the sky and thought, you know what this needs? Skyhawk.
Does Claymore stand, because when was it actually released? Sorry.
2006.
2006. Does it stand the test of time?
It certainly suffers from some slightly janky animation. I mean, it's Madhouse sort of at their peak, so it looks great for its time.
Sure.
It's kind of like you'd love a remake by Ufotable or something right now, and it would just be like top tier. Will say, ending. And it's not their fault. They basically ran out of time because they followed the manga pretty much up to the exact moment where they didn't in the final 2 episodes, where apparently they were like, you need to finish this. And they're like, oh, fuck. How? And it's a bit of an ass pull and it's famously terrible. But it's kind of only literally the last half of the last episode. It's just like, the fuck was that?
Poochie gets drawn out.
I need to go hold on my whole planet. It's honestly quite literally like that. So it's just like
sock puppets emerging from the
the end.
The end.
The hell was that?
Pull a better cartoon out of my ass. So basically, it's really good up until the end. You forgive the end because you know that they had to kind of end it, and they just clearly were like, oh fuck, we have no idea what to do here, so we'll just finish it up, don't worry about it, it's fine. Everyone's always wanted a season 2 to go to the conclusion that the manga came to, because the manga is famously very, very good. So we all hold out hope for a remake one day.
Claymore Brotherhood,
but at the same time, it's definitely worth a watch. I really liked it, right up until the end. It's just absolutely fantastic. Animation still holds up, great story, great characters, and definitely worth a watch. Claymore, tick from me.
All right, Sam. Here's the thing. You've sold me on the fantasy.
Cool.
Now sell me on the dark, baby.
It's dark. It's those Yomas are they're indiscriminately murdering people left, right, and center. It's violent too.
Okay, so there's a bit of blood and gore in this one.
Oh yeah, big time. The opening episode, Raki, as I said, the Yoma are shapeshifters, right? So Raki's kind of enamored by Claire as soon as she arrives in his town, and she's kind of very dismissive of him. But then he goes back home, and his brother is eaten his sister. Okay. And his brother is a Yoma, ate his brother a while ago and shapeshifted into him.
Right.
So it's fucking savage.
Terrible.
And then Claire follows him because she could smell Yoma on him.
Right.
Slays him. That's kind of how it all begins.
Okay.
So it's
a friendship born out of murdering your brother. Yeah.
Trauma bond.
Yeah. It's a trauma bond. Yeah. It's and Claire's, I won't go into Claire's history too much, but there's a similar kind of backstory there.
It's funny though, because that sounded like the opening of Demon Slayer, which is very
100% they've taken that.
Is that a dark fantasy, or is it, because it's a shonen, but is it a dark fantasy?
There's elements.
Kind of.
There's elements.
Even though it's not that medieval aesthetic.
Yeah, I would say that's probably a fair call. Like
that's what I mean. Though they all kind of are dark, though. Like
yeah, I mean, Attack on Titan's probably a dark fantasy.
Definitely, that's
definitely
no
is.
question.
Like, yeah,
I think you hit the nail on the head there, Charlie, when you said like trauma story, and I think that's another of the threads that runs through a lot of these. Is that it's relationships born of trauma and born of living in this crappy, hostile, brutal world and just bonded together by survival, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah. So it's like. It's dark and it's pretty gory, and it's cool. It's a good show. It really is. Like I'd always heard about it. I'd never watched it, but it'd be one of those shows where I was like, shit, I should probably watch this. And I watched it. I was like, this is really good. So yeah, it's not like in my top 10 or anything, but like it's a good show. Definitely worthwhile watching. Also, before we jump into the next one, we should have probably topped this at the start of the show. But Gerald's been staying with me for a few days. We have been watching Cowboy Bebop.
That's right.
The live version on Netflix. Now, interesting. I don't want to get too bogged down in this because we are doing a Hollywood remake live action special. But all I'll say is I don't hate it.
This is the biggest shock. This is a twist of the season.
I don't hate it, but I certainly don't love it. It's not the anime. Never going to be the anime. It's not a remake of the anime. It seems to me the only way I can get through it, maybe I'm just forcing myself and trying to see some kind of light here, but it's like, I'm just like, okay, this is based on the world of Cowboy Bebop, and this is a Western interpretation, a Netflix show. Do you know what it looks like? It looks like and feels a lot like Altered Carbon. Now, is that a good thing? Not really, but it's, I don't know. It's, Gerald, what do you reckon, man? They're missing some key elements.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, you say don't get bogged down, but I mean, I could borrow to the center of the earth and trying to unpack this one. And, I've been on this show digging deep into why I think, as I said, Cowboy Bebop is one of my favorite things of all time. And there's an artfulness to that anime original about watching and being watched and, wearing your past, but not digging directly into it. And the remake doesn't have that artfulness to it.
Yes.
We spoke about, like the sweet spot of Cowboy Bebop is that, ennui, that, Spike looking into the distance and you're like, I don't know what's going on with that guy, but he's every person I've ever met. Whereas through the Western lens of TV making, it's like, well, the B plot needs to be Spike's journey. So let's throw that wound right in your face from, the first scenes of the first episode. And so just by virtue of bringing that want and that emotional disorder explicitly to the surface, it just changes the whole flavor.
It does.
And so the moment that happens, you're like, okay, it's something different and it's fun. It's watchable.
Yes.
But I still like the anime better.
There's never going to be a version of this that was better than the anime.
Yeah.
Never. So I accepted that going in.
Yeah.
But yes, the fact that they've kind of made not Sid Vicious, Spike.
I knew exactly.
You know what I was going for.
Yeah.
The fact that they've made the whole Vicious and Spike thing as like the absolute A story through which everything else is kind of funneled is just missing the point.
Yeah.
It's like that's the reason it works so well in the anime is that it kind of you only get bits of it and it's bubbling in the back.
Yeah.
But the cool thing about it is the fact that and same with Jet's story as well. They've tried to really up Jet's fatherhood thing. And he's like, I got to find a doll for my daughter. And it's just like, no, you don't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's not how this works, man. I know that, I can see the Western writer room. I'm not trying to shit on Western storytelling, but just when you bring something from the East into the West, you're automatically going to bring your own lens to it, right? So I can see him in the writer's room being like, what's Jet's need, man?
Yeah.
What do we need? He needs to have something. It's like the whole point of this is that they have nothing anymore. They're running from their past and they're kind of just existing now.
Sure.
And that's what's great about the anime. They're kind of just doing things to fill time because they're broken people with not much else to live for.
Well, I'd say one thing to that and one more thing on top of that that's another redeeming feature for me. The Netflix show is an hour versus a half hour.
Yes.
And the mechanics of telling a half-hour story versus a 1 hour story is exactly what you think it is. There's more time to fill.
Yes.
And the way in which the beats and the flow of dramatic tension has to work through that 1 hour form puts a lot more pressure on having different narrative lines running at different times. And so by virtue of having to fill that space, I can see how you would reach for the material that exists. But in filling that space, you've kind of overladen it.
Correct.
And, maybe it was Netflix that said you can do it, but it needs to be 1 hour and this is just the cost of doing business. So I don't know. The other thing that this show does have in common with the original is Kano's music.
Yes.
And that's still dope as hell.
Anyway, look, we're about halfway through the series. You and I, we kind of smashed through it. I will refrain from giving a full breakdown until we do the episode, until I've finished it.
Sure.
But all I'll say is don't love it, don't hate it. Kind of don't know if I like it, but I don't hate it.
No, I haven't watched it, so I have nothing. That's like I've been uncharacteristically quiet this entire time.
Yes.
Haven't watched it, so
We're saving your opinion in reserve for the big dance.
Yes, yes. Now, speaking of Charlotte's opinions, Charlotte, why don't you tell us a little bit about a show which you've actually mentioned before on this podcast in the Netflix walkthrough in season 1. Charlotte, why don't you tell us about the dark fantasy show Akame Ga Kill?
I'm going to start by saying I was trying this whole time to think of a bit about Jane Eyre being dark fantasy, but I could not remember the name of the main male character. But all I had in my head was Mr. Rorschach. That is not his name.
Rochester.
But I was like, that's a dark fantasy right there,
yes,
where
it
Jane
is.
Eyre ends up with Rorschach from Watchmen. So I was just like, this is bad. I mean, Rochester's pretty
I'd
bad
watch
too.
it.
Yeah.
Bad vibes all around.
It's
with
bad
him.
vibes.
It's his wife in the attic or some shit.
Yes.
It's a bad vibe. It is a dark fantasy.
Well, so is what's his name from Wuthering Heights. He's the fucking worst.
Oh, Catherine's bad too. Anyway,
Yeah.
all bad vibes. Here we go.
Mr. Darcy, a total gentleman though. So,
That's true. That's true.
All right, we love an enemies to lovers trope.
That's it.
That started it all. All right, I'm back with not that bit because I couldn't think of it. But I'm here with Akame Ga Kill. So I talked about, yes, as Sam said on the Netflix episode that we did way back in season 1.
A while back
It's
now.
probably not even worth listening to. And because we just speed through them. I think there's a completely different lineup on Netflix now. Has way more anime than they ever
we should probably do another one of those.
Yeah, because it's the most accessible for, like, most people have a Netflix subscription.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to shell out, you know, it's like you're more likely to have Netflix and Crunchyroll.
Yes, yes. Unless you're an anime fan, you're not going to buy Crunchyroll or Funimation. You should. If you are getting into it, guys.
Support the industry.
Support the industry.
This show is an interesting one. So Akame Ga Kill, it's 2014 anime.
Mm-hmm.
It was at the time, let me just paint you a picture. I had decided like anime was sort of a bit kiddie for me. Now I know this is bad. In 2014, I was having a rebellious phase. I was like, you know, going to clubs and being normal. Oh, what the fuck? I was not doing any of the above. I just decided I was a bit anime fatigued.
Yes, I remember
And I
this
think
time.
a lot of it was to do with the fact that I felt like a lot of the shows I was watching was a little bit too kind of kiddie or shonen. I kind of, you know, Naruto was pretty much done. Like I kind of just couldn't quite get back into it or find a new show that really gripped me because I longed for some more edgy content. So when I read about this show, I went, oh my God, my prayers have been answered.
Oh,
where
yeah.
you have a shonen stereotypical show
Yep.
that is actually dealing with dark themes. It was like a shonen thing where people died and actually shit happened and it was gory and it was aimed at like it was like shonen tropes, but aimed at an older audience.
Yeah.
So I thought, this is great. This is what my answers have been instead of everyone miraculously surviving, you know, and like and that kind of thing, like
Plot armor.
I mean, characters still have plot armor in this, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But I thought it was going to be really cool. I could not have been more wrong. This show is terrible. And I thought when Sam told me to do this, I went, you know what, maybe I'll just watch one episode to rehash my memory because I can't remember any of it. And as I put it on, it was like I had unlocked some kind of like repressed memory and the whole storyline came flooding back and I was just like,
unzipped you.
I was just furious again. I was like, this show is trash. And like last week we did deathmatch animes last week and I did The Future Diary, Mirai Nikki, which is edgy trash as well, but I kind of enjoyed it at the same time.
It's sort of, it
I
knows
was
it's
like,
trash and it works it. Yeah.
this one is just like, it's just so bad and it takes itself way too seriously.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. I'll give you a brief rundown of it. Akame Ga Kill follows a character called Tatsumi, who is just like a kind of low-level sword-wielding guy. This is all set in a medieval like world, and basically there is a really, really repressive government called and they're like the capital, which is the city, but they're kind of just called the capital. And they run a tight ship, as in they kill everyone and they're really evil and like it's a really bad place to live. We start with Tatsumi he's like a country boy and he goes to the city and he gets there to find his friends and his friends have been murdered. Is this right? Yeah, they've been like murdered and then he gets taken in by this like lovely family who then turn out to be psychopaths and then he gets raided by this group called the Night Raid, they're called. And they are a group of assassins who are like outlaw number one in the whole world. Like they are a rebellious group Anyway, it turns out that actually the family that took him in were evil and psychopathic and night
They're
raid.
rich, very rich.
Super rich.
They were like kind of basically hoarding poor people to torture and stuff.
Yeah, like they were just...
It's edgy as fuck.
It's edgy, but like with no... So they're like, these guys are rich, so they're evil and like torture. There's no like explanation as to why anyone's like this. They're just like,
well, we all know if you had enough money, you'd hunt people. You know, it's just the
that's
natural...
how it is.
We just did the Battle Royale episode. Absolutely.
I need to feel something.
So basically like that, he joins the night raid, which are a motley crew of hot girls with different weapons and powers and different
A couple
outfits.
of guys in there.
Oh, there's two guys. But they're, they're just all classic, like there's like a girl with a bikini on for no apparent reason.
Yeah.
There's like the silent, edgy one. Like they're all the worst. Anyway, basically he joins this group of boring tropes, and then he becomes one of them, and that is basically the storyline, and they're assassins. I'm not going to go any deeper because I can't give it any more energy.
It becomes two warring groups though, doesn't it?
Yes. So basically, in the end, you've got the Night Raid, who you follow, which he joins, and they're
a revolutionary group.
Yes, a revolutionary group against the evil capital. And the capital have their own team of elite assassins that fight back. Yep. They've got these things called Imperial Arms, which is the power system.
Yes.
Which are basically like items that you can fuse with, I guess, or they're like weapons. And so, for example, there's a girl who is on the assassin team who has a makeup box that when she puts her makeup on, she turns completely into like, she can disguise herself and turn into. So this is the fantasy elements here. Like it was all very much that. He's got a sword. Akame is the titular character who I don't know why. She's hardly really.
She barely does anything, does she?
But they're like, Akame Ga Kill. And I'm like, oh, she must be a big character. Like, I guess, but.
Kind of.
She's a hot chick with a sword. Like, she's great, but.
She's a cool character.
But I will say.
And she fights her sister.
Yeah, look, there's so many things. Like, Sam obviously was more invested in the storyline than I've been.
I haven't watched it for like 6 years.
Yeah, I know, but it's just come back to me. I'm just like, oh my God. But one thing that really stands out is the villain in this storyline, who, by all accounts, is. I'm like, is this a feminist masterpiece? Spoiler, it's absolutely not. But this, the undisputed
queen even.
The undisputed queen of power is the most like evil general of all the army is this girl called Esdeath. And she's got her imperial arms is the ice power. And she's obscenely powerful. Like there's this kind of like, everyone's just like, she's the strongest. We've got to defeat her. She's also a Yandia.
Oh, yeah.
So I did Mirai Nikki last week, which has the prototype Yandia with the pink hair. Now we've got the Yandia with the blue hair.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
She's ice powers.
Yep.
Yeah.
And she's just obsessed. Like, I was like, oh, cool. It's kind of good they have a villain who is so OP, who's a woman. Like, I was kind of like, sort of into this. Like, great. Anyway, flash forward 2 seconds. She's inexplicably obsessed and in love with Natsumi. Like, inexplicably, he smiles and she's like, I love him. And then she puts a literal, like, it's like some weird fanboy fantasy where she comes out and like literally puts a dog collar on him and is like, you are mine now. And then just like is obsessed with him. And she's like this really hot, evil woman. And that's her.
Take it,
But it's just like all of the build up of this like really amazingly strong villain who is just completely undone in 2 seconds with her obsession with this really average guy who now has like 17 girlfriends
like real
in this
life,
world.
man.
Like I can't. Anyway,
that guy fails up.
Yeah, like I was just like,
is it a masterpiece?
What? Yeah, I can't. Basically, the show is, I would say, not worth watching. The power system of the Imperial Arms, I was like, I kind of don't mind that. Like, it's sort of
kind of fun.
The different ones, like the ice one is considered the most powerful, and I don't mind the one-on-one battles with the other assassin team.
Some cool fights.
But
really cool
it's
fights.
So edgy.
Yeah, it's trash
for no reason. Like the deaths are really gory. They kill people for shock factor all the time. The villains have really no. There's like just no. It's just like they are evil.
Oh yeah, mustache twirling. Like there's very little nuance.
Yeah.
Look, it's not a good show. But wanted to talk about it because I thought it was funny for Charlotte to just shit on something. Like that's funny. Have a kick it while it's down.
Charlie's lawyers are gathering to try. They're writing this letter to get out of this role.
No, I mean, to be fair, Graham has had the worst shows recently, so it was my turn to take it. And also, I'm usually down for some trash. Like I'm usually down.
You're more like you have more of an affinity for trash than I do. You watch a lot of trash.
She's got a harder stomach than you have, Sam.
I'm edgier.
You're edgy.
As the edgelord of this, just not a thing. I can't. It's dark, as in like a 14-year-old boy's version of a dark fantasy.
Yeah, that's exactly like if you're a 14-year-old boy, you'd be absolutely all over it. You know what I mean? Like, but it's fucking trash.
George R. Martin probably likes Akame Ga Kill. Like, probably does, to be honest.
Probably
George,
true.
everyone taking shots. I mean, unapologetically, my rule for anime is that if I don't feel comfortable watching it next to my partner, I don't watch it.
Yeah.
And this is just one that, just the harem elements, the skimpy thing, looking at it through like a 14-year-old boy's prism is right. It's just like, okay, this exists. I'm going to let it go through to the keeper. But that's just my straighty 180 take.
Yeah, it's got a huge fan base, of course, as you can imagine. But like, for me, it's like,
I think the manga is entirely different. It's important to note that people have said that the anime caught up really quickly because it aired. The manga was released in 2013 and went until 2019. So it's actually a lot longer. So they did make up the ending.
Anime
Similar, there you go, classic anime original.
Yeah,
I still don't think that there's much foundation there. So people are like, just the source material. I haven't read the source material of this. I haven't done that.
You didn't go back and watch? You didn't go and study it?
No. I chose peace.
Yeah.
I think.
Chose happiness.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, so White Fox animated it. Yep. We've talked about them before with Steins Gate. ReZero. Like they actually have really good animation. So the quality of animation at the time was actually pretty high. Some of the fight scenes are pretty cool. And some of the powers that come out, like, zombie powers and like the string man. Like
the string man, yeah. That's right. Here's a
throwing knives and like, that kind of thing. I like the makeup box disguise kit.
Yeah. Look, if you want to get the best out of Akame Ga Kill, YouTube, best fights Akame Ga Kill, and you've got it. You know what I mean? That you've done it. You've done all you're going to get. All you're going to get from that show right then and there, probably in about 15 minutes compilation on YouTube. Like that's what you need to do if you want to get Akame Ga Kill. Don't waste your time by actually watching it.
Yeah, it's just so. I think the reason I'm so angry about it, there's so many shows that are like this too. Like it's not a rarity, unfortunately, in anime.
Especially back then, it was a huge glut. I mean, so many isekais like it. Right now.
Back then, though, I was excited for it. And that's what hurt the most.
I love that you were having a soft identity crisis and you were very vulnerable. You're like, if I'm not this, what am I? And then this anime just like came around and put a really skeezy shoulder around you.
No wonder I didn't watch it for 2 years. Yeah. Like seriously, it was done. Yeah. Character designs are like, they're
very anime.
They're very like they're every you want a type of girl, you got it. Like that is true, different. Like whatever your taste.
Yeah.
So that's not good as a general rule. I don't know, and that to me is a fucking bullshit character.
He's like whatever a male version of a Mary Sue is. You know what I mean? It's just like he's so like, it's nothing. Then everyone's like Kirito from fucking Sword Art Online.
Literally, it's so similar.
Same thing. It's just like everyone's like, oh, I'm in love with you. It's like, what the fuck for? What the fuck for?
Yeah, he smiles, and the strongest character in the world. This is like, I love you. That's literally the plot line. I can't cope.
Yeah, it's bad. It's bad.
Anyway, that's it. So don't watch it. But I could have gotten into more detail. But I did all
Life's
you do
too
is
short.
bad.
Life's too short, man.
I'm sorry. Watch Claymore.
Yeah, watch Claymore. But now that we've done with one good and one bad, well, let's move on to something. And funny you mentioned it because mentioning shows that you might find difficult to watch next to one's partner on the laptop. Well, let's talk, Gerald, about Berserk.
Right. Okay, let's start right out in front there. The last 2 episodes of Berserk, I was laying in bed and I closed the laptop screen, recalling what happens, and we'll get to that. Berserk. This was the second anime I ever watched.
Mm-hmm.
I after I'd finished with Cowboy Bebop, went back to the video store.
Yep.
And these were the next ones that got rented off. And for a long time, I thought I was the only person in the world that had watched this show. And it's so strange is the wrong word, but the way that it all comes together in the end, it like burrows under your skin. I'm like, oh, this is just tattooed in me now forever. And that kind of mirrors where it kind of sits in the fandom a little bit, where it's so critically acclaimed, it has this fan base, but it's just never kind of gotten that level of notoriety as the Neon Genesises or some of these other ones that get put on the pedestal. So lot to talk about. Let's start with what it's about. Berserk is dark fantasy set in a brutal medieval world, and it follows the story of Guts, who is a lone mercenary who partners up with enigmatic, brilliant mercenary band leader called Griffith. And it's kind of about their mercenary band, the Band of the Hawk, and their rise in pursuit of Griffith's dream, which is to have a kingdom of his own. in a lot of ways, it's as just broadly that. There are the family of the people that live in this mercenary band. There is many, many wars. It is gory. You've got intrigue between nobles and the tensions of a commoner like Griffiths rising to the top in a very strict hierarchical society. And then there's also this very unnerving, dread-filled fantasy element that's bubbling under the surface.
Oh, yeah.
Demonic imagery, interactions with figures that seem a couple of standard deviations outside of the reality that you've been given. And central to all of this, a talisman that hangs around Griffith's neck. And what it builds to, the clashing of this mercenary story and the climax of those demonic elements, is something that you'll never forget. And also something that requires you to close the laptop next to your partner.
Yes.
Now, this is one that's really difficult to talk about without spoilers.
Yes,
because so much of its lasting, you say value. Watching the episodes is a lot of value, but the reason why it's kind of attained God tier level in some people's minds is because of how it all sums. I should say that it's by a genius visionary by the name of Kentaro Miura, who died very recently and famously left the manga unfinished.
Yes.
Now, the manga goes way more broad in the story than what the anime does. The anime is 25 episodes. It was produced by OLM, who, when I looked them up, have done Pokemon.
Yep.
A lot of Pokemon.
A lot of Pokemon. Tamagotchi as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, same vibe.
Yeah.
Berserk and Pokemon.
They're also doing Komi-san Can't Communicate.
Yes. So that's their big
quite
one.
a varied body of work, actually.
Totally. So that's the big one that's just dropped on Netflix. And so famously, the anime shows essentially the arc, which is Guts joining with the band, climaxing with where that band finishes. And then the majority of the manga is kind of about Guts following that period, working to make the events of that thing right.
Yes. The anime is almost the prologue, like, in a way.
Yeah.
The story kind of begins after the anime ends. Now, famously, everyone's been waiting to have this. The anime came out in 1997. It's old, right. And it does suffer from old animation, and some of it's pretty fucking janky. However, be careful what you wish for sometimes, fans, because in 2016, finally, all of us who've been waiting all this time for the story to continue in anime form, it did. Horribly. Just horribly. I mean, 2016, it's now a famous meme. Like Berserk 2016 is basically a meme because the animation was just so bad. It's made by Linden Films, who do Tokyo Revengers, also a shit fucking show. I'm sorry. And I'm also convinced it's badly written. But anyway, I'll get into that another time. But it's so bad. And it kind of, everyone just couldn't believe what we were watching. You know what I mean?
It was like PlayStation 2 cutscene.
And the sound design was just appalling, like the clanking of Guts' sword. I mean, it was just one of those things where you're like, why did you do this? I wish no one had done anything. We were better off with nothing,
Yeah.
So sorry to jump in there quickly, but that was like just something I've mentioned it before.
Let Gerald have Berserk.
I know, God damn it.
He's like, you can have Berserk. I just want to say,
I'll just chime in a little bit.
I'm just going to talk.
It does end very abruptly.
Yes.
And you can really understand with that like wealth of source material to adapt these questions of why something else didn't happen. And when we were speaking the other day, you made the good point about one of the things that distinguishes the manga is about how detailed it is, how closely the lines are drawn. And the vision of Miura is one of the things that sets apart. Like he was inspired by Bosch, by Escher, and by Geiger, and it's got elements of Lovecraft in there.
Oh yeah.
And whereas traditional manga is all about space,
yes,
this is very much about the detail. It's difficult to bring to the screen at that level of quality.
Yeah.
And so, when you're watching a 1997 production, I've been ruined, like I used to be able to watch this and be like, what a beautiful painting of the countryside. Now I'm like, make those trees move. I want to see each individual leaf.
Yes.
But there is, I think we've all seen a million different dark fantasy things. And I imagine one of like the big challenges for a creator is like, how do I make my monsters distinct? How do I give this a visual identity that's just not everything that I've seen before? And especially in the context of Japanese popular culture, Berserk does this.
Oh yeah,
it's unlike anything that that had kind of gone before, and it's inspired a lot of stuff, but it still kind of stands on its own.
Yes.
And so that's the first thing I'd say about it. This is another one that's the vision of one person. They've played it out with that vision in mind, and for its strengths and weaknesses, it's a complete vision. It feels like, you're engaging with someone's art, which is awesome.
Yes.
The second thing I'd say is that the story is incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible in the way that kind of Shakespearean stuff is incredible, where like, okay, the plot might not be that complex, but you're taking very recognizable, iconic characters and bringing them in towards these like big moments that sum to a kind of morality tale or a dark fable about how people interact.
Yes.
And so if the story is about this mercenary band and about this character called Guts teaming up with Griffith, well, actually what their relationship is about is that experience that we all have in life where you meet someone incredible and you put them on a pedestal and they're everything that you're not and everything that you want to be, and you might be a little bit lost and you're pulled in by their like drive and their focus. And the story ultimately becomes this cautionary tale about being sucked into someone else's dreams and about using that as a crutch to not go and figure your own things out. And it goes much deeper than that, but that's a storyline that you don't really see all that often, and it gets played out to its absolute conclusions. And so the other side of that is that Griffith is a really interesting character.
Fascinating.
Too. It's the other side of that psychology where you are so driven in pursuit of this goal. You want to get to the castle. You've got the charisma to bring these people around you. But then all of a sudden you're leading your friends through war and people are getting killed. And how do you live with the responsibility of those deaths? Does it make you stop, or does it push you on even harder because you've got to make those deaths count? And again, the way that all plays towards its final conclusion is a really fascinating psychological study as well. So now we'll get to the trigger warnings associated with this show. It's a capital D dark fantasy, and there's a lot of, as you said before, Charlie, trauma being a motif in these kind of stories. Yeah, trauma's at the heart of this one too.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is a sexual trauma. Griffith, Guts, and also the third central character, Casca, who's the female lieutenant of the Hawks as well, all touched by sexual violence. And so if that is a thing for you, I'd say give this one a wide berth.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's totally fair.
Yeah.
But strangely, by virtue of touching on the violence of sex and intimacy, there's moments in the show where the characters are able to transcend that, and it's actually quite affecting. There's certain fair arguments about like not needing to go that dark to get that light, but in this piece of 1997 fiction, it is affecting. I think that great characters, really strong story with a clear message. It's very tight. There's no wasted beats like sometimes you get in anime. It doesn't go on any detours. It's just like, these are the steps.
Yes.
And yeah, for those reasons, it's really hung with me, because where it goes, and you kind of have to trust us here, is all time.
Yeah. It's still one of my favorites for sure. I mean, the manga is so revered. I mean, like, I can't even begin to describe how revered the manga is. Like, it's because his art style is just so extraordinary. Like, as you say, Geiger, big influencer, same guy who designed the alien in Alien. So there's a lot of those elements in the monster design. And yeah, I mean, it's super dark. I mean, the manga started in 1989, so it's old. And yeah, Miura's been doing it the whole time. Miura's a fascinating character too, because like he started making manga at age 10. He made one 40-volume manga from the age of 10 to like 16.
Like, way to make me feel bad.
I know. Yeah, he's a gun. Like, it's crazy how it was called Mirror Ranger. So it was like kind of as in like Miura Ranger, kind of, very, very pretty smart for a 10-year-old.
Like,
not bad.
Pretty cool.
Noted down.
40 volumes, and he followed that up with another manga series called The Way of the Sword. And then he went into Berserk and has been doing Berserk up until his very, very sad, untimely death. He was 22 when he started Berserk in 1989, and he'd already written 2 full mangas before that from the age of 10. Amazing. So, pretty extraordinary stuff. And very private man too. Again, not unlike Hiromu Arakawa from Fullmetal Alchemist. Yep. Almost no photos of him online. Well, it's quite a thing with the mangakas. They managed to just kind of... Well, it lends itself to hermit life.
I was going to say, do you even have time to go out into public? It's the most grueling, intense job ever.
Sit in a dark room drawing and writing for your whole life.
They don't even intend to be mysterious. They just have to be. They're actually longing for the spotlight. They're
100%. It's a fascinating
His
guy.
His character designs are so iconic as well. Guts is just in my head. The big sword.
He's called the Black Swordsman.
Yeah.
And he's the guy with the giant sword. Iconic. He kind of...
hulking.
He started that whole sort of trope, or at least was the final version of that's the trope of the giant Ronin, wandering swordsman. Modern day. Obviously,
how many muscles can we draw into a human person?
Yes, and how dark can
and more.
But also,
but not gross like Becky. That's too far.
That's too far. He's got
the sweet spot.
But the Black Sword. I mean, of course, Cloud Strife, Final Fantasy VII. Very much you can see the design elements there with the giant, the Buster sword. Ichigo from Bleach, massive throw to it.
Big swords club.
Yep, big swords, protagonist. It's a whole thing. And he's just a fascinating character. And the relationship between Guts and Griffith is so interesting because it's pretty homoerotic. Without even, it's not even implicit. It's pretty explicit. It's on the surface there. And it's fascinating. And you're right. Their relationship is key.
And all 3 of them are there's a...
And Casca as well,
it's pretty...
all the lines are blurred between all 3 of them, and it's kind of just an interesting triangle.
And so I think that's a really important point, because when the story does turn, and it does take you by surprise, the reason why they get away with it so much is because it's all built into that relationship depth that you're so invested in. It's not plot turning for the sake of plot, or wouldn't it be sick if it now did this? It's just so baked in, to everything about what the show is.
It's interesting how it hasn't sort of been cancelled to a degree, but it's just so good, and it's because of its time, I suppose. But probably doesn't get made today. But it's interesting that it's because you're right. It's so based in character that these rather traumatic and sort of quite problematic content. I mean, this show is very fucked up. It's really the reason we haven't brought it up on Gateway to Anime before, despite all of us being into it early and being a huge reason for us all getting into anime. You're second. It was I watched it in 2010. Yeah, it was early for me as well. You too, I think?
Yeah, too early. I think I watched it and was just oh no,
oh god,
oh god.
Well, 97. I was that's 10 or so. Wait, that's 20 plus years ago.
Yeah, man. He started it nearly 30 years ago. Yeah, so it's very much because of his time, but it is just so good that he gets away with these kind of, it's a bit like Game of Thrones in that respect. It's there's some problematic content, perhaps unnecessarily, but it's all based in characters. So it's not, even though it is gratuitous, it's not for the sake of shock. I don't think it does shock you, but he's not doing cheap shock value.
That's why Akame Ga Kill is doing a cheap shock value.
Exactly. That's a perfect
doesn't
example.
earn anything.
Yes. Yeah. That's just pure shock value done poorly. Yeah. And then you got Berserk, which just does shock value done right.
I just realized why I hated Akame Ga Kill so much.
You just realized
I just realized it's because there's no hot sensei. There's none. I was just thinking, I was and there's none in Berserk either.
There is not one in Berserk.
Never make this mistake.
I feel like dark fantasy
kind of sucks for you.
There's no hot teachers. So actually it's my least favorite genre. So I can deal with Black Clover. We talked about this because it's a trashy, tropey show, but there is a hot sensei in that show. Yeah. Hot. So that was my 2 cents. I'm out now. No hot teacher? Don't talk to me.
I'm out.
Don't waste my time.
So I think that's a fair call, Sam, about he reaches for paints in the paint box that probably don't get reached for anymore for good reason. Yeah. And if that's something that you're not comfortable with or don't want on your Tuesday afternoon, that's totally fair enough. So we should put that right out in front.
Yeah. Massive content warning.
Yeah, big time.
But rewatching it for this show, one thing that I picked up that I didn't on the original watch is just how incredible the music is as well. And so I kind of went down this rabbit hole looking up the gentleman responsible, Susumu Hirasawa. And this soundtrack is this 90s eclectic mix of Oasis rock, synths, an electronic, and it kind of like, how does this work? But it totally does, because it builds the quality in the show of this kind of nostalgic dream, you know? And so you realize that you've been seeded by this music all the way through.
Yes.
And it's just, it's a jam. I've been listening. It's very rare that I like type an OST into Spotify, and I'm like, time to go about my day with the Guts' theme going in my headphones, you know? But it got me.
What have we done to you?
Deeply triggering day.
Yeah.
Also, quick one, Claymore's soundtrack, also fantastic, by the way. The CD sold, when it was a CD back then, sold hugely. So like another one with an excellent soundtrack, just slide that in there.
Akame Ga Kill? Cannot remember for the life of me. Anything about the soundtrack.
Akame Ga Kill, it's zeros across the board.
I listen, you know what OST I listen to all the time is Bleach?
It's a bit sick.
Like that guitar is like, it's like, so just it's so extra.
So how does it go?
I don't know why I tried. But like, yeah, I was watching it to be like, man, this is sick. That's my favorite one.
It's a great OST.
I listen to it all the time.
It's really, really good. Bleach did so much right for so long until it didn't.
Sorry, Naruto obviously has the best one too.
Yes.
That is a great running song. A great running song.
Oh man, and
the one time I ran.
It's so dope. Yeah. He also, Miura as well, he was heavily influenced by 80s horror franchises. So that was a big thing for him. So the God Hand are actually influenced by the Hellraiser series.
Interesting.
He was also influenced by The Name of the Rose. He also drew influence heavily from the Brothers Grimm's fairy tales.
Yeah,
which of course makes perfect sense. But also the Evil Dead franchise, particularly the Evil Dead 2. It's a big thing for him. He even stated after the first episode of Berserk was finished that it came out before the Evil Dead 2, but he'd obviously influenced his manga drawing already. And he became anxious that he'd actually get sued by them.
Right.
He was like, oh shit. Because Ash and Guts are quite similar in there. Chainsaw arm, giant sword, kind of similar vibes, and fighting against forces of evil and stoic kind of. Ash is obviously much funnier and I feel like you can definitely see that.
I don't think you needed to worry in hindsight, but I can imagine. I
think Berserk probably has the bleakest world out of all of them so far.
Big time.
Oh, actually, I don't know. Akame Ga Kill's also bad. They're all bleak.
They're all pretty bleak.
You don't want to be in any dark fantasy world. It's not like reincarnated into any of these is bad. Is a bad time.
Claymore sucks as well.
Actually, it's all bad.
All bad with dark fantasies. Dark is the key word. And
no one's having a good time.
No one's having a good time. No one, not even Griffith's having a good time. They're all having a shit time.
Yeah, no one comes out of this capital H happy, that's for sure.
Oh man, it's it's just what is Guts referred to as a struggler, which is such a great thing to describe on him. But again, he's such an interesting character too, because very often you see the stoic kind of male character protagonist who can't articulate his emotions and is incapable of communication and whatnot, and carries a deep wound within him. But he's actually a fascinating character because he does messed up things because he has to. He's in a world where he is up against the forces of evil, and sometimes black and white's not an option. Gray is pretty much the default setting.
Yeah.
And so he does some pretty fucked up things, but it's just about surviving through a horrifying, bleak, almost hopeless world. But he struggles regardless. And he's Sisyphus in a way. He's pushing that boulder up the hill no matter what the fuck happens. And he keeps on going. And that's why I think people really come back to this show, and the manga in particular. Not just the art style, which is exquisite and so detailed. And if you want to look up images of Berserk manga. It'll blow your mind how intricate it is.
Yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, it is, let alone the great story plot you said about Griffiths and Guts and, not getting caught up in someone else's dream. Excellent stuff. But just the fact that Guts keeps on persevering when he could easily have just killed himself.
Yeah.
Or just died. Just let it happen. You know what I mean? Just fuck it, whatever. What's the point? But he still goes forward for better or worse. And that's a fascinating thing to watch.
If you look up any top 10 most unfortunate protagonists who have a really bad run, it's always number 1 Guts, number 2 Ken Kaneki from Tokyo Ghoul.
Yes.
And they're the two that you're this is not fun, sorry.
No, bad times. Bad times.
It's through the ringer a bit.
Yeah.
He gets put through the meat grinder, but he never gives up trying to use the struggles to find the answers that he's chasing, even by his own acknowledgement. He's not the most emotionally deep in a way that's going to allow him to pursue that successfully, And so there's this tension there between someone that can kill 100 men with a broadsword, but in a kind of childlike way is trying to figure out what what he is and what that means and what he should do and what he actually wants. And I don't know about you, but like being an adult, it feels like one of the hardest things to do sometimes is just to know what you want, you know?
Yeah.
Literally.
And kind of this show, I think, really connects with that. He's trying to figure out, like, why am I here? You know?
Why do I keep struggling against a world which has stacked the deck against me so heavily?
Yeah.
And he does keep going forward. It's obviously metaphorical. We're all fighting our own demons, and he's literally fighting them.
Yeah.
But it is a pretty easy metaphor. And it's just, that's what's so interesting for me about it. For me, it's like Guts' struggle against the unreasonable silence of the universe, or not even silence, like active pushback to him is just fascinating to me. And I think even though, and there's also the 3 movies, by the way, if you don't want to go back and watch a 1997, like old janky 25 episode show, there are 3 movies which are called the Golden Age arc film trilogy. They came out in 2012 and 13, made by Studio 4 Degrees Celsius, and they haven't done much that I've really heard of, like Spriggan, they did Transformers, animated 2008. But it's not bad. It's not bad. It's a lot of CGI. It was a precursor to what 2016 Linden Films did to us.
They're like, you know what worked in that? Let's
the CG, the one thing that everyone got salty about.
Yeah.
Like, let's just really double down on that in the second season.
I kind of admire it, you know, like it's just
insane. But you can watch the 3 movies. The first 2 are a little bit like, it's kind of like, it's just a condensed version of the first series, the Golden Age arc.
Yeah.
And it's not bad. The 3rd film is actually quite good. Like it kind of, because the animation, the CG kind of works during the climax section of the show, the climax of the whole arc. And it's kind of worth watching if you don't want to go and sit through 25 episodes. You can watch 3 films and they're pretty good. It'll give you the Berserk story. Yeah. But I think if you really want the proper experience, you should read the manga. Yeah. But otherwise, the series is still good. It held up for you, right?
Totally. Some of the animation was dated, but the story hit just as hard. And I think you kind of summed up well there kind of how it lands, where it's a guy face pressed up against, the void of life and existence and struggling with it, not whispering back. And then he sees this light on the hill, which is Griffith. And he goes, okay, maybe that's my reason. But then by the end of the show, the void does whisper back and it's horrifying, It's like whatever's there, you don't want it whispering.
You don't want
and the way in which that connects with the light on the hill is the thing that's going to stay with you forever. So yeah, if those content warnings notwithstanding, that sounds like it's something up your alley, give it a watch, and
absolutely,
it'll stay with you forever.
Well, I mean, this whole genre, dark fantasy, like I said before, the key first word is dark, so automatically there's trigger warnings across all 3 of these. These are all pretty, not necessarily problematic. Berserk has some huge problematic elements. Even Claymore does as well. Akame Ga Kill, definitely. So like, there's some pretty fucked up things across all of these, but that's the genre. So if this isn't your genre, don't watch these.
Yeah.
But if you are into this genre, well, you kind of know what you're getting in for anyway. We've all seen Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
And I feel like with things like Berserk, like yes, it's probably got the most content warning out of any of them, I would say.
For sure.
But it's sort of because of the level of detail and the level of kind of like the actual content and the world building, the manga and everything, it's like it kind of earns a bit of that. Whereas Akame Ga Kill just goes, ha ha ha, here's some fucked up things for no reason. Like there's literally earned nothing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'd say that, obviously content warning wise, just give it a wide berth. But Berserk could be, I mean, people would love the manga. Would you recommend reading the manga over watching the series?
I haven't actually read the manga yet. That's what I was inspired to do, because when I saw it when I was 19, it just ended abruptly. I remember just sitting there in my room, kind of, it hits that like climax of the void whispering back and you being horrified, and then it kind of says, end scene. And that's it.
That's it.
I remember just sitting in my room being like, what did I just see? And not being aware that there was this kind of broader mythology in the manga to go check out. So that's my homework. I'm going to go dive into that.
And the sad part is, of course, he died last year. And
totally.
End of last year, and never finished it. I think he's about 80% of the way through. There's talk that his assistants were left extensive notes, but I doubt we'll never get him finishing the series, which is a damn shame. Very, very sad.
Yeah.
But he left, he is one of the most famous mangaka out there. Like, he is so revered in the community and in the industry. Like, he is the guy. Him and Oda from One Piece. They're kind of like the 2 top dogs.
Yeah.
And for very different reasons, very different shows. But it's interesting. So there you have it.
I just need to quickly talk about Gerald and I's other favourite dark fantasy show, Fruits Basket, which I would say is probably a dark fantasy.
It is. I was just thinking this. So a little while ago, Charlie told me that her favorite, your favorite?
Yes, pretty much my favorite now.
Was Fruits Basket. And I'd always seen it as kind of top of the list on some of these boards. I'm not going to lie, I was put off by the name. I'm not big into fruit in general. You know?
The name makes absolutely no sense.
Like I'll eat my apple a day, but not with any enthusiasm. And so if there's a fruit salad at a barbecue, it's not where I'm going first. That's all I'm saying. And so enough. I judged the book by its cover, and this is a prime example of what's underneath being more disturbing than I thought I was getting into. But yeah, it is a dark fantasy, Charlie.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. It's a shoujo dark fantasy, which is a very rare.
That's true.
Like Jane Eyre. Very rare.
Like Jane Eyre.
But here we are.
There you go.
Yeah.
I think, I'm just so glad. I just feel like I needed an on-camera proof that I made someone watch Fruits Basket and they liked it.
You have been banging on about it since season 1, so it's fairly impressive.
I felt validated, and sorry for traumatizing you further with some.
Yeah, it's another one that I think is just going to get under my skin for a long time. It was 2 weeks ago since I finished it, and I'm still thinking about it. And I'm like, episode 1 was cute boys turning into animals, and by the end, they're like weeping about a disconnection from like something, and you're like,
Yeah, really gets you.
Yeah.
Well, you've managed to get one of yours across, but my next one for you, Gerald, of course, is Legend of the Galactic Heroes, because you've got your one over. Now I've got to get mine.
Yeah, I want to watch it. I think that the old version is difficult to get your hands on.
It is hard to find, and also like it's same as Berserk, suffers from an even older 89. This started airing, and it suffers exactly from the same thing of like the animation. Sometimes it's just terrible, but the story, like Berserk, the story carries it. So anyway, I've talked enough about that show for now.
See, Fruits Basket's got a really shiny 2019 edit.
It does, so, and it's a good one, isn't it?
Really good.
It's a really good adaptation.
2001 is like, no, don't do it.
The system works. You got someone to watch Fruits Basket.
Thank God.
Anyway, thank you so much for joining us, Gerald. Always a pleasure. So good to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure. So much fun. And thank you very much. If you like the dark fantasy genre, there are 2 to watch and 1 to avoid, unless you want to watch some YouTube recaps like a la Brett. So we'll leave that with you. But thanks so much for joining us. We'll catch you next time.
We actually have some shout-outs we need to do.
We do?
Yeah.
All right. So we'd like to give some shout-outs to our wonderful patrons. And that is, of course, Curtis. That is Stuart. That is Christian, Alex, Samantha, and Caroline. Thank you guys so much. It means a lot to us. Seriously. You guys are absolute legends. If anyone else has joined up since, well, I'm sorry. I'll jump on the website and make sure that you get your shout outs too. But thank you so much to all of our patrons. It means so much to us, honestly. And we'll catch you all next time.